Well, the point I'm trying to make, Secretary, is that if this is so important to the military, and you as Secretary of the Department of Defense should know more about the border. Mr. Secretary, I urge you to skip the photo ops next time that you go to a port of entry and spend time on the ground in places like the Diamond Day Ranch.
I think you should ask the soldiers on the border whether they've been photo op visits or not, because I spent a lot of time on the ground with the soldiers, getting an understanding of what they're facing, what they're doing, what their capabilities are.
Secretary, I reclaim my time.
Thank
you. Secretary, I reclaim my time.
Understand what our troops do.
What we witnessed in that hearing was only a preview of what was about to erupt. Congressman Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico, a man who has lived his entire life on the border, delivered a stunning blow to the Defense Secretary during what was supposed to be a routine oversight session. This wasn't just a debate over policy, budgets, or party lines. It was a showdown over credibility. With first-hand experience of border life, Vasquez exposed the gulf between someone who has lived the reality and a Washington official who knows it only through staged photo ops. As the questions flew, the secretary stumbled, revealing just how out of touch he really was. Vasquez is no ordinary politician parroting talking points. He's a relentless advocate for his community and the challenges they face.
Here now recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I understand that the border is a top priority for you and the Department of Defense. Well, it's also one of my top priorities in my border district. That's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation to stop fentanyl at the border, secure our ports of entry, hire more CBP personnel, and combat the cartels, areas that I'm sure we agree on. Now, DOD has spent more than $525 million from the defense budget on military operations on the border. You've done it by diverting over $1 billion from military modernization and quality of life programs like housing. And as such, I'm sure you're well informed as to what your warfighters are doing on our border and the characteristics of the border itself. Secretary Hegseth, do you know how many border miles there are in New Mexico?
Not the exact number of miles.
Can you give me a round figure?
Hundreds.
Okay, 180 miles. Can you tell me where the border wall starts and ends on this map of New Mexico?
It's not properly oriented to your map, but I know that unfortunately, because of the administration previous, they did not have the opportunity to finish the border wall.
Thank you, Secretary.
Rust on the ground instead of
Thank you, Secretary. And you have been to New Mexico. Could you tell me where in New Mexico you've been to?
I've been to the border twice to look at once at our national defense area down there because I can't recall a time when a Secretary of Defense has gone down in the first 4 or 5 months of his tenure to the border to better understand.
Was that in an urban area or in a rural area?
Both areas, traversed rural areas and urban areas.
Okay, so you must be
some with walls, some without.
Secretary.
And if President Trump was actually supported, we'd have a border
Thank you, Secretary. I reclaim my time. So the most remote part of New Mexico is called the Boot Heel. And I'm not sure that you spent any time in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. Mr. Secretary, I was raised on the border. I've lived there my whole life. I've worked alongside ranchers, farmers, landowners, wildlife biologists, and other stakeholders for over a decade. I headed a border security task force in my district before coming to Congress. I've traveled with Border Patrol on ATVs. I've hunted the border on horseback and hiked dozens of miles in the most remote stretches of the border in this region. Now, do you happen to know why there hasn't been a border wall built in the Boot Heel?
Well, based on what you just described, you should be a big fan of what our administration is.
Well, Secretary, I'm asking why a border wall has not been built. Funds have been allocated for other parts of the border.
Here's what I know. Our commanders on the ground and others and our engineers would understand what goes where and why, and where there should be a border wall, there will be a border wall.
Okay,
it will be funded through reconciliation.
Secretary, are you familiar with the Animas Mountains, with Alamo Hueco, with San Luis Mountains, with Guadalupe Pass or Long Canyon?
Again,
critical border areas.
I'm aware that there are gaps in different places where walls are not as effective as other places, and I get that.
Thank
we're
you,
applying
infrastructure I appreciate your answer
where
on
it
that.
makes the most sense, because we're going to get 100% operational control.
Thank you, Secretary. So you agree then that a border wall doesn't make sense for the entire country?
I think we need a border wall across our entire border.
Okay, so you should know then why it's almost physically impossible to build a border across the Animas Mountains and the terrain challenges that poses and the billions of dollars. Do you know if there's roads on those mountains currently?
If we're going to spend money as a government, it should be
I'll take that as a no.
Secure our southern border.
Well, the point I'm trying to make, Secretary, is that if this is so important to the military, and you as Secretary of the Department of Defense should know more about the border. Mr. Secretary, I urge you to skip the photo ops next time that you go to a port of entry and spend time on the ground in places like the Diamond Day Ranch.
I think you should ask the soldiers on the border whether they've been photo op visits or not, because I spent a lot of time on the ground with the soldiers, getting an understanding of what they're facing, what they're doing, what their capabilities are.
Secretary, I reclaim my time.
Thank
you. Secretary, I reclaim my time.
To understand what our troops do and why.
Gentleman reclaims his time.
Thank you. Secretary, do you know what a tethered aerostat system is?
I do.
Okay. Well, great. Then you know that this type of surveillance technology is superior to having thousands of troops sitting in trucks looking at an empty desert. I've requested funds for more tethered aerostat systems. We haven't had a response from your department. Are you familiar with ASTs?
What's an AST?
Well, it's an autonomous surveillance tower. They're equipped with these advanced cameras that have the capability to relay critical information to border agents on the ground. And this type of technology is badly needed on the boot heel. And it's a much better expenditure than a border wall is.
I've seen that. I've seen those towers in use.
Great. Well, these technologies have been described to me by both Border Patrol and CBP as force multipliers, allowing their personnel to focus on law enforcement efforts while leaving this mundane surveillance task to much more efficient and cost-effective technology, a much more efficient way to surveil that part of the border. Now, Mr. Secretary, I have serious concerns with your fundamental lack of knowledge about the U.S.-Mexico border, considering the billions of dollars that DOD is slated to spend on this mission, with little clarity to those of us who live there. I would encourage you to do some homework on my region and learn what will actually make our border more secure and more safe. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
What unfolded in that room was more than a routine hearing. It was a collision between lived experience and empty slogans. On one side, Congressman Gabe Vasquez, born and raised in a border district. He's lived the terrain, worked with ranchers and farmers, patrolled alongside Border Patrol agents, even led a local task force on border security. For him, this wasn't a talking point, it was his life. Across from him sat Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, a man who had barely set foot in New Mexico. Hegseth came armed with broad answers, recycled slogans, and vague assurances that play well in Washington. But Vasquez had no patience for spin. He came with facts, lived experience, and a determination to expose the truth. From the very start, Vasquez went straight to the numbers. He reminded the room that the Department of Defense had already diverted over $1 billion away from military modernization and housing projects in order to fund border deployments. Money meant to improve equipment, housing, and quality of life for U.S. troops had instead been funneled into militarized optics. $500 million here, hundreds of millions there, siphoned away from warfighters to stage political photo ops. Vasquez called it for what it was. Every wasted dollar was a dollar stolen from readiness, from modernization, from the soldiers themselves. And back home, people weren't impressed. They knew the difference between flashy DC theatrics and lasting solution. But that was only the beginning. Vasquez turned the hearing into something closer to a classroom, and the secretary quickly failed the test. His first question was so simple it should have been automatic. How many miles of border lie in New Mexico? Hegseth fumbled, guessed, and got it wrong. Vasquez corrected him, 180 miles. This wasn't obscure trivia, it was basic geography. Then Vasquez raised the stakes. Could the secretary point on a map to where the wall started and ended in New Mexico? Hegseth struggled again, mumbling excuses, shifting blame. It was humiliating because of how basic the question was. The exposure didn't stop there. Vasquez pressed further. Where in New Mexico had the secretary actually visited? The answer was weak, too vague trips, shallow visits, focused more on optics than learning. Vasquez was unmoved. For him, this wasn't theory. He knew the land, the people, the realities no slogan could erase. Then came the knockout example, the Bootheel region. Vasquez had lived it, hiked it, hunted it on horseback, worked with the families who call it home. He asked why a wall hadn't been built there. The real answer is obvious to anyone who knows the terrain. It's nearly impossible. The Animas Mountains, the Guadalupe Pass, Long Canyon, rugged, remote, unforgiving. Building a wall there would cost billions and accomplish almost nothing. Pressed for an answer, the secretary had none. Vasquez didn't let it slide. He laid out the truth. Walls don't work everywhere. You can't draw a line on a map and expect concrete to conquer nature. Geography has limits, and ignoring them wastes money. By now, the secretary was backed into a corner, but Vasquez wasn't finished. After dismantling the talking points, he pivoted to solutions, real solutions. Instead of wasting billions on impossible walls, he called for proven technology. He cited tethered aerostat systems, surveillance balloons that give constant monitoring across vast stretches of land. He pointed to autonomous surveillance towers with cameras and sensors feeding real-time data to agents. These weren't sci-fi gadgets, they were tools Border Patrol had asked for. Force multipliers that help fewer agents cover more ground and focus on law enforcement instead of watching empty desert. And here's the damning contrast. Vasquez had already submitted funding requests for these tools. He'd asked for resources. He'd sent proposals. The Department of Defense ignored him. That silence spoke louder than any speech. While Vasquez pushed for cost-effective, reality-based solutions, the secretary clung to outdated political symbols meant to please cameras, not communities. By the time Vasquez was done, the room had fallen silent. What he exposed wasn't just ignorance. It was a dangerous disconnect. Billions siphoned from soldiers' housing and modernization projects had bought little more than photo ops. The secretary couldn't answer basic questions about geography, terrain, or strategy. Worse, he couldn't admit what Border Patrol agents and local residents already knew. Walls are not a one-size-fits-all solution. Strategy and technology, not slogans, are what people on the ground are asking for. Vasquez closed with a wake-up call. If the Defense Department is going to pour billions into border operations, the least it can do is understand the land, the communities, and the people who live there. This wasn't political theater, it was truth colliding with spin. On one side, a congressman armed with lived experience, data, and practical solutions. On the other, a defense secretary leaning on vagueness and political cliches. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Vasquez didn't just embarrass the secretary, he exposed a deeper failure. Washington keeps wasting billions on outdated tactics while ignoring the solutions agents and communities have been asking for all along. The people who live on the border know the terrain, they know what works, yet Washington refuses to listen, clinging to theatrics over results. So the real question isn't whether a wall should stretch across mountains or deserts, the real question is why we're still funding photo ops instead of solutions. If you paused at any point during this exchange, that's a good thing, because what Vasquez demonstrated is the kind of leadership America needs. Leaders who've lived the reality, who understand the land, who refuse to let politics overwrite facts. If you believe border security should be built on reality, not theater, take this as a reminder. Washington's choices affect real lives on the ground. The solutions exist, the tools are ready, the expertise is here. What's missing is the political will to prioritize effectiveness over optics. Until that changes, billions will be wasted, families will stay vulnerable, and communities like those in New Mexico will keep carrying the cost of a government more interested in symbols than results. If you found this breakdown powerful, share it and subscribe. There's much more to uncover.